Hey everyone, my name is Lance, and this is Amped About Aimpad. For today's episode, I'd like to focus on something very important for analog switches, and that's called dead zones. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Alright, so what is a dead zone? In terms of describing this article that I found on third-helix.com a couple of years ago does an excellent job of describing what a dead zone is and different ways to approach it from the perspective of an Xbox 360 controller. Since the Aimpad R5 keyboard looks like an Xbox 360 controller, keeping this type of stuff in mind is extremely important. So this is from the perspective of a game developer when they're developing the games with an Xbox 360 controller in mind, and how they need to design it in such a way that as the Xbox controller gets old and worn out, what impact will that have on the games? So basically he describes what a dead zone is, and that's essentially an area where you define a threshold of where the Xbox controller is going to be registered as having movement or not having movement in the game. And so he says that there's basically two ways that are effective of designing a dead zone. And the first one he calls a naive way, or the axial dead zone. And so this defines an area on the Xbox 360 controller where no movement is going to be detected at all. So this, anywhere in this reddish area right here, if the Xbox controller's moved in any of those areas, no movement will be detected by the game. If it goes into this grayish area, then that type of signal will be passed to the game. So in some games this might be okay, but honestly, it's a pretty horrible implementation, especially for first-person shooters or third-person shooters where you want precise movement to be detected. So he suggests a better way. It's a radial dead zone. And just like the last one, if you're in this reddish area where the Xbox controller is kind of wiggling around, none of that small, subtle movement will be noticed by the game. And as soon as you pass that threshold, then the signals will be sent to the game and it will be utilized. So this is particularly relevant for analog keys, because if we're going to throw away a significant chunk of the key press, then you have a vastly different experience of what you're expecting. So using this picture here, I can kind of demonstrate what's going on. The equivalent of a dead zone or the radial dead zone on an Xbox controller versus the usable range is anything in this grayish area out to the screenish circle. Contrasting that to a Cherry MX switch, if you have a dead zone here of, let's say, 20% or 30%, you would be pushing this key in past this threshold and nothing would be happening as you're pushing the key in. And that's a fairly sizable disconnect to the user experience, because one of our biggest design principles in designing these analog switches was that if the user pushes the button in and they know that they're pushing the key in and nothing is happening, that's a really bad situation, a bad user experience, because it's not that big of a deal when it's just a normal digital key. It doesn't matter where that press is, because there's a significant stroke. So I know when I hear that snap, or if I hit the bottom of the key press and I push that W key every single time, reliably, it's going to make a W key very consistently. The problem if you switch that to an analog mode, if I have any type of dead zone whatsoever in pushing this key, and say I want to move slow. So I push in the key and I want to be moving slow, but I'm not moving slow. So I have to push down a little bit more, and I'm either going to reach the point where, yes, I'm going slow, but I might have passed the speed where I wanted to go, and now I'm going a little bit faster. So now I have to ease off again, and you have to kind of guess where that area is as you're pushing the key in on when the key is going to be activated. So it's a bad user experience to have any type of dead zone equivalent of an Xbox controller, because it's simply not necessary. On this particular keyboard, I'm still fine-tuning what type of dead zone I want on there, but right now it's less than 1% of the key press. From a hardware perspective, we're throwing away a little bit, because with analog signals, you're going to have a certain amount of noise irregardless you just can't get rid of, and so we have to define a little bit. But right now the threshold is extremely small, less than 1%. I think it's actually right now less than 0.5%. But an ideal situation is you want it like this, where you have the entire range of the key press. So if I just push the key in just a small amount, and I know as a user that I'm pushing the key in because I feel that the resistance on the key switch, or I feel the resistance of the spring, and I feel that my finger has passed a certain point, like I should be moving by now. I need to be moving right now. And if I don't provide that user experience to the user, then I failed designing this hardware. So let's go in a little bit and show you kind of what this means. So right now this program is set up to simulate an Xbox 360 controller, or what the game is going to pass along as if the Xbox controller were being used in the game. So there's this really important area here called dead zone. There's 3 different options. You have none, independent axis, and circular. So let's say I set this to none. And let's assume that the game has, or actually, yeah, let's set this to none first so I can give you an idea of what's going on. So there's no dead zone in this game whatsoever. Let's say I reduce our feature to increase the anti-dead zone feature. If I move in or push this key in just a small amount, you'll see that it wiggles just a small amount as I just barely put my finger in there. And it's increasing the value of the range right here, and visually you can see what's happening. So all the way through the whole press, I'm pushing this down, and it's responding right at the top, and it's smoothly all the way through the entire press. And this is what I want for every single game out there. If I don't have this type of experience when I play a game and be able to control my smooth movement back and forth, left and right, and forward and backwards, if I don't have that user experience for every game, I failed. So the problem then becomes I have no features enabled right now. It's designed to assume that there's no dead zone in the game at all. But let's say I start up a new game and it has this independent axis, and that's just like the axial dead zone with a cross. So now there's like probably a 20 or 30% anti-dead zone, or 20 or 30% dead zone on this game that we're simulating right now. So now if I push in this W key a little bit, I know that I'm pushing the key at this point. I can feel the resistance. I know I should be moving right now, but nothing is happening on this stick. There's no values increasing, so I have to push it down a little bit more. Oh, now wait, no, there it is. That's the point where I want to start walking. But I've pushed in the key a good amount, probably a millimeter or so. But so now I'm like, okay, I want to move slowly again. No, I gotta move. There it is. No, that's not. Yep. So I'm fighting this constantly. If I want to move just barely slow enough, I have to keep my finger held down at this depth constantly to walk slowly. And if I release, I lose all that concept again, because now I don't remember exactly where in that key press that depth was. So there it is again. And it's a really bad disconnecting experience to have any type of effect like that. So so in order to counteract that, we have this dead zone anti-dead zone feature that counteracts that specifically. So if I increase this a little bit more, and I'll push the W key in a little bit, still not responding, so I'm going to increase it some more. Oh, there it is a little bit. Probably a little bit more, and it's probably a little too high, right about there. Okay, so I've counteracted the effect of that. So if I push this key in just a small amount, you'll see it's instantly responding right at the very top of that press. It's the way it should be. And if I take this off, what's happening here is it's jumping to the extent of past of where the dead zone is defined for that game. So I can reliably press that key in, and it's going to skip all that crap of the dead zone that I don't need to worry about and immediately respond to the game. So that way, consistently, every single game I can play, no matter what the dead zone is, I can adjust this feature to increase it or decrease it. And let's say I increase it a massive amount. So now if I push in the W key, look how far it jumps. It jumps really, really far in each of those directions. And there might be a few games that are that high, but realistically that's not going to happen. Most of them tend to be about 20 or 30%, somewhere in that range. So that's how we're dealing with this issue. Now, what if a game developer says, well, I want to use a radial dead zone because that's the best type of experience. So if I'm using that method here of counteracting this this dead zone, but I'm assuming from the hardware perspective that the developer is using an axial dead zone, then that's a problem, because let's say I'm pushing down this W and I'm running full speed, and I want to aim at someone off to the left with my mouse, but I want to move myself off to the right just a little bit. If I push in this D key just a small amount, you'll see what happens is it moves me a significant amount off to the right. And visually, especially from like a third-person perspective view, it looks really artificial to do that. It makes a big skip off to the right. So now I have to counteract that impact using the keyboard. And so we added another feature that swaps between those two methods. And so this is now in a anti-dead zone, assuming we're using a circular or an axial dead zone. So now if I push the W key in all the way and then push the D a small amount, you'll see it's moving just a little bit off to the right and to the left, because we've completely redesigned the way that the keyboard is interacting with the game. So any game, regardless if it's using an axial dead zone or a circular or radial dead zone, we can deal with that type of issue. So that for every single game you play, you can have the same type of experience where you push the key in a little bit and you move a little bit, and if you push it in all the way, it's going to move all the way, and you have a direct one-to-one relationship of what you would expect to happen in the game happens when you push the key. And so I kind of like to show what that looks like in a game called the Talos Principle, and how this actually makes a meaningful difference in a real game. Alright, so here we have the Talos Principle. So in this game, there is a lot of control over how fast you're going to move and in which direction you can move, and so this is a prime example of analog controls done well. I've set up this keyboard with the assumption that this game is using an axial dead zone. It actually isn't, but I wanted to show you the effect of what it looks like in a game if you assume wrongly that the game is using axial dead zone and it's not. So what that looks like is if I push in this W key, and I've exaggerated the effect on this just for demonstration purposes, but if I push in the W key a little bit, I'll start walking in that speed, and if I push the D key just a small amount, I want to move just a little bit to the right, but what happens is I'm now moving at a significant angle, probably a 20 or 30% angle there, so I'm not actually able to move in a other than directly straight forward or more than this 20 or 30%, and I can move in different angles and things like that outside of that, but it's not, it looks a little strange not being able to move at a precise angle. So now if I switch the mode to assume that the game is using a radial dead zone, I'll push in a little bit here and then off to the right just a little bit, and you'll see that I can actually move in more directions than just those other ones, and it's a little bit more of a natural movement around that straight ahead movement, and then it is a pretty noticeable difference. I'll contrast it again. It's very artificial moving that full speed. Now it's nothing as bad as compared to just a normal keyboard mode where you're always moving at 45-degree angles and always at full speed, but so this is really horrible. But if I switch it back, and now if I fine-tune it a little bit, I'm going to drop this down significantly since the dead zone's not that big. I can actually move really, really slow in this game. I can move even slower than that, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, really slow, and then I can precisely, oh, I have the wrong one on there, precisely move myself in any direction that I want, and have full control of the mouse all at the same time. So hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea of what's possible by being able to account for the dead zone effects in different games, and hopefully you found this enjoyable. Alright, so hopefully you've gained a little bit of insight into our development process that we designed the Aimpad R5 keyboard around the limitations of an Xbox controller, how we can work around those limitations and make the experience perfect for gaming. If you like this video and would like to see more, go ahead and subscribe. We'd love to have you. Otherwise, until next time, thanks for watching.